Okay, so this is where we left off last time, just the outline of the business coverage form. For auto, we've got section 1 tells what's covered, and the most important thing here we need to know is the symbol, because choosing a symbol says which autos are going to be covered. Then we outline liability, we outline physical damage coverage, so that's for my auto itself if it gets damaged. And then we've got conditions, then we got definitions. So that's where we're going. So all right, what's covered? Section 1, covered autos. We have different coverage symbols, 1 through 9. And again, the industry just kind of expects you to know what the difference between symbol 1 and symbol 2 is. It's not difficult. It's just sometimes I think hard with 9 symbols to remember what each one actually stands for. So we're going to find out 1 is any auto, and then 2 is going to be owned autos, right? So the difference being if you borrowed somebody's auto or used some other type of auto, it wouldn't be covered under the policy. So you'd want to know that. That's something that you have to pay attention to there. So what is an auto? Well, it's a land motor vehicle designed for use on public roads. That's usually the key part of an auto, is designed for use on public roads. Also, if there happens to be something that doesn't fit that definition, that does have a compulsory auto insurance law that applies to it. So in 49 of our 50 states, we have state laws that say you must have auto insurance. New Hampshire is the exception, right? So you have to have auto insurance. And if you have a vehicle that doesn't fit the definition of a traditional automobile, but does have to have compulsory insurance, all right, then we'll count that one and we'll cover it. But auto does not include mobile equipment. Where do we insure mobile equipment? Right, inland marine, right? So if you had something like a bulldozer, construction equipment, mobile equipment like that, that isn't going to be covered under the auto policy. We've got to get that covered under the inland marine form. That's where we get that. All right, so which autos are covered? Here's our 9 different symbols. The most important ones are 1, 2, and 7, at least in my mind. So 1, I mean, that's what I want as an insured. I want any auto to be covered. Any auto, whether I drive it, whether it's mine that I own, or whether I borrowed it for somebody else, or whether I rented it, whatever. If I drive it, I want it covered, or any of my employees drives it, I want it covered. But what you see is that there's a lot of insurance companies that don't want to do it that way because it's so broad. They would prefer you to identify which autos that you're talking about, and at a minimum, say, okay, fine, all the autos that you own. So symbol 2, owned autos only. So that means, yeah, if you borrow one from somebody else, not covered. If you rent a vehicle, it's not covered if you just have symbol 2 because you don't own it. If you have symbol 1, all that stuff is fine because any auto, right? Skip ahead to 7. 7 is specifically listed autos. So you say, well, what's the difference between 7 and 2? There's one big difference, and that's if you newly acquire an auto. It would automatically be covered under symbol 2 because you own it. Good enough. Symbol 7, if that's the symbol you've got, when you acquire a new vehicle, you better let your insurance company know right away. Because if you fail to do that, if you've got symbol 7 and you get a new auto, well, that's not covered. 3 and 4 depend on the distribution of vehicles that you've got. So maybe you only have private passenger autos. And maybe you have trucks or buses and you want those insured somewhere else. Okay, fine. Symbol 3 will take care of you. We'll only handle your private passenger autos. Symbol 4 is the opposite. What if you wanted trucks or buses and you didn't have any private passenger autos? Okay, we can use symbol 4. 5 and 6 depend on the state that you're in. Some states have a no-fault insurance program, usually for relatively minor injuries. So the idea behind no fault is if I get injured in an accident, I take that claim to my insurance company. We don't care about fault. It's a literal term, no fault. Fault doesn't matter. That flies in the face of liability. Liability is all about fault. Some people say, well, maybe it would be cheaper if we just had everybody take their claims to their own insurance company and we could settle these things faster and reimburse people quicker. That's undoubtedly true. But at least when it comes to big dollar losses, no state has been willing to say, well, let's just handle that on a no fault basis. So all states have fault-based liability. Some states have carved out the bottom end and have said, well, the first 10,000 is going to be no fault. Okay, then we'll use a personal injury protection program in those states, a PIP program. You can add the PIP with symbol 5. So you're adding that to something else you've got. So you might have symbol 1 and symbol 5. That depends on the state that you're in. Like Indiana doesn't have a PIP law, so you don't need symbol 5 in Indiana. Michigan does. Florida does. If you're in one of those two states, you're going to need symbol 5. Same thing with symbol 6. Some states have compulsory uninsured motorist coverage. So by law, you're required to have it. Okay, symbol 6, tax that on. Same thing, multiple symbols. You might have symbol 2 and symbol 6 if you're in one of those states. If you're not in one of those states, then we're probably not going to worry about either symbol 5 or symbol 6. Okay, so symbol 7. All right, that's again mentioned. You're specifically listing the autos. So in my mind, it's 1, 2, and 7 are the big ones. 7, you're specifically listing. 2 is everything you own, including new ones that you purchase that you own. 1 is any auto. Okay, what if you had symbol 2? Well, if you commonly rent vehicles and that's all you do, you could do symbol 2 and symbol 8. So maybe your insurance company won't sell you symbol 1 for any auto. Well, all right, if all you do is, yep, it's the vehicles I own plus sometimes we rent, okay, no problem. Symbol 2 and symbol 8 takes care of it. It's not any auto, but we've at least got this idea that we've got your exposures adequately covered by combining 2 and 8. We could do that. Or 7 and 8 for that matter, if you're not planning on buying any new vehicles. Just got to be careful with 7. Big risk there if you newly acquire a vehicle. And then number 9 is non-owned autos only. So maybe you frequently borrow some other vehicle that you know about. If you know that, again, your insurance company won't sell you symbol 1. If you got symbol 1, you don't need any of these others except maybe 5 and 6. But they won't sell you symbol 1. You got symbol 2, owned autos only. Okay, well, sometimes I drive these other vehicles that we don't own. No problem. Let's add symbol 9 to that. So you could have 2 and 9. I suppose there could be a business out there that all they do is symbol 8 or symbol 9. When we drive, it's only rented vehicles. It's only borrowed vehicles. That could be non-owned autos is maybe all you do. If that's the case, we got a way to cover it. You see how this works. And then we have symbol 19. I didn't put it on the slide, but symbol 19 is the one for to help us get mobile equipment that is subject to compulsory laws. So it doesn't fit our definition of an auto, but we've got compulsory auto insurance that you have to have because it does sometimes travel on the road. Okay, symbol 19 takes care of that for us. So you can see if you're taking an industry exam, this is a lot of stuff to memorize. The ideas aren't that hard. It only gets hard when you start picking out, if I say, identify the symbol that relates to owned autos subject to compulsory uninsured motorist. All right, I think that's a lot to ask that the person off the top of their head has to say, yes, that is symbol 6. I can make you memorize all that. I just don't think it's terribly useful. As long as you know that there's a way out there to do it, that's the key. So again, symbol 1, any auto. Symbol 2, only autos I own. Symbol 7, only autos I own that are listed. I'm specifically going to list them. 3 is only private passenger. 4 is everything but private passenger. 5 and 6 depends on your state law. And then 8 or 9 adds in whether or not you rent vehicles or whether you borrow vehicles that you don't own. There you go. Okay, so newly acquired autos, 1 through 6, no problem, automatic coverage. And they'll figure it out when they come to audit your premium. That's how they will know that you have another audit. Symbol 7 is a problem, though, because it'll apply if you're replacing a covered auto. But if it's just a brand new auto that's not a replacement, it won't be covered. That's your gap. That's what you have to worry about. When you talk about trailers and mobile equipment, if they're towed by a covered auto, they're covered for liability. Now, here's the thing. It's kind of hard to ascribe liability to a trailer, right? Where you say, I caused the accident, but it was actually the trailer that caused the accident. So it doesn't count if it's not covered. So you start to think, the trailers and mobile equipment, that's really nice of them to include that. When they're being towed, it's not. Because it would be really weird to say, the accident wasn't the vehicle I was driving. The accident is caused by the item that I was towing. It seems really weird to me that you would describe an accident that way, and then an insurance company would say, we're not going to cover that. They're just making it clear here that, yeah, we're not ever going to have to worry about that. It'll be covered. Okay, shifting sections into section 1 is what's covered, and that's primarily a symbol. Section 2, liability coverage. So what happens here? Well, we're paying the damages. So whatever a court awards, we're paying up to the limit, and limits are usually single limits. It's not split like it was with personal auto. It could be, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's just $100,000, $1 million, just a flat dollar amount. We don't care how much is property damage, how much is bodily injury, how many people you hurt. None of that matters. They're per accident limits. So we'll pay the damages up to the limit. The cost of defense, that's an important liability coverage. That's on top. That's free. Well, it's not free. It's included with the cost of what you pay. And it's on top of the limit. So they don't say, well, you had a $1 million limit, but it cost us $200,000 to defend. Therefore, we have $800,000 available to pay damages. That's not how it works. We say, no, we have a million available to pay damages, and whatever it costs to defend you, that's our problem. We have to pay for that, and that may be on top of the limit. It also covers covered pollution cost or expense. So to get pollution coverage, it has to be an accident that involves property damage and or bodily injury. And then usually you're talking about gas that's spilled out that has to be cleaned up. So that's not a major pollution cost. This is a small pollution coverage if necessary. So now the pollution piece, that is part of the limit. Cost of defense is on top of the limits. And then the liability comes from property damage or bodily injury from an accident. And we've got a special definition for accident that you can read the policy to see what that is. Okay, so who all is insured? Well, the named insured, and that's going to depend on the symbol a little bit. Also, it's pretty broad, anybody using a covered auto with permission. And then just like we have in the personal policy, any person or organization who's liable for the conduct of an insured. How does that happen? My business is sponsoring an event with the Red Cross. We have an accident. Somebody gets hurt in an auto accident. And as a result, they sue the Red Cross. My insurance will step in and say, yeah, this is something that arose out of the conduct of an insured. So my policy would help indemnify the Red Cross in that situation. And then again, if you go from one state to another that has required coverages that you don't have, so maybe you drive from Indiana into Michigan. Michigan's got that no-fault coverage. You wouldn't have bought that. Automatically, you'll get those required coverages for the period of time that you're in that state. Same thing if the minimum limits are higher than what you've bought. That's unusual in commercial because commercial people are usually buying fairly large limits. So it's usually not about increasing the limit up to a higher state minimum. It's adding the required coverages like compulsory uninsured motorist. If you happen to drive into a state that requires that, you don't have it because your state doesn't have it. This will automatically provide you with that. And then we move into the exclusions, right? So some of these aren't going to surprise you at all. Intended injury, yeah, intentional stuff is never covered. If you assumed through a hold harmless agreement, you took somebody else's liability through a contract specific to auto, that's hard to come up with an example of how that can happen. But if you did that, your insurance is going to say, what are you doing taking on additional liability without asking us? You can't do that. That's something that is going to cause us a problem. Any injury that's covered by work comp. So if it's an employee, the employee doesn't have to worry about trying to collect from my auto liability. So employee gets into an accident, maybe with another employee. Both of those are going to be handled through workers' compensation. Auto doesn't step in and do that. Same thing if it happens to be employer's liability. We're going to handle workers' comp and employer's liability together. But it's the same idea. If either of these come up with this idea that we're suing the employer, auto doesn't deal with that. Workers' comp or employer's liability does. Same thing with a fellow employee. That's also supposed to be shifted into the workers' comp employer liability piece. Any property that's in my care or custody or control, even if it belongs to somebody else, somebody gives me something, and I put it in my truck, and in the meanwhile, my truck gets wrecked in an accident and their property gets damaged. That property was in my care, custody, and control. We don't handle that in auto. We'd have to handle that as part of my business personal property in that part of the policies that we have. So not auto. Same idea with handling of property or movement of property by mechanical device. There's one thing. Let me just check my notes and see if I should bring it up here or later. Okay, this is fair to talk about here. Handling of property is actually a little bit more complicated than you might think. You should take some time to read this part in the book to make sure you understand. So handling of property, here's the thing. Before it's on the truck and after it's in the final destination, it's not covered. However, while it's being moved from the truck to the final destination, that's actually handled in auto, not in the CGL. The CGL actually excludes loading and unloading. So you'd say, wow, wait a minute. If I'm in the business of hauling property to somebody's place, how do I figure out where it's covered then? Well, it's covered under the CGL until it's on the truck. Once it's on the truck, it's covered under the auto piece until it's finally delivered. And that's where that's going to be. So that's one of the interesting situations about where that is while it's under the care. So the unloading and loading and unloading is a little bit technical there. A couple other exclusions just real quick. And again, movement of property by mechanical device. We're just trying to define if the auto form is supposed to cover that or if the CGL is supposed to cover it. So it's not really an exclusion so much as it is moving it to proper places, just like workers' comp. Same idea. Operations and completed operations, same thing. Those sound like CGL exposures. Those should be covered under the commercial general liability policy. So we're just defining where things ought to be covered. Pollution, yep, we got a tiny bit of coverage for pollution that results as an accident, but that's it. We're not going to extend it further, and that's what that's in there for. Racing, yeah, we're going to exclude racing. War, there's always a war exclusion. So most of these exclusions shouldn't be surprising, and they mostly exist either to exclude obvious things or things I think are obvious, like intentional losses and war. We always see those exclusions in any policy that we're going to look at. And then the other types of exclusions really are to make sure that it gets covered in the right place, that there's not duplicate coverage. And that's employer's liability, workers' comp, fellow employee, the care, custody, and control, the handling of property, the movement of property by mechanical device, operations, and completed operations. All of that is saying that, hey, this should really be covered somewhere else. So it's not excluding the loss, it's excluding it from the business auto policy. And there's a difference there, because in the one situation, you have to worry about, gosh, do I have coverage at all? Here, we're just saying, well, probably not in the business auto policy. The handling of property is the most technical one there. You might want to read up on that a little bit. Okay, so those are exclusions. I just want to talk about limits real quick. And then we'll save the physical damage for the next lecture. But the limit of insurance, these are per accident limits, per occurrence limits, which means per occurrence, yeah, we don't have a general aggregate here. We're going to have per occurrence limits. They're going to be combined single limits, so we don't care about bodily injury per person, bodily injury per accident, property damage per accident. Personal auto policies are almost always split limits. And that's where we say, okay, like the minimum limit in Indiana was 25, 50, 10, 25,000 per person bodily injury. That's the most that can be paid to any one person. 50,000 per accident, no matter how many people you hurt, and no single person gets more than 25. And then 10,000 in property damage per accident. You could choose to handle your split limits that way. Your limits could be split. They're normally combined single limits where we just say you got 250,000 in coverage. You got $1 million in coverage. We don't care who you hurt or how many people you hurt or whether it was property damage or bodily injury. Makes it a lot simpler to deal with. But either way, these limits are per occurrence. If you had 5 accidents, yep, you'll have access to the limit potentially 5 times, depending on how bad that accident is and the total amount of damage. Okay, that's a good place to cut it off here. We'll pick up with physical damage on the next lecture. Thanks a lot, you guys.